You yourself was on this page. I mean, they had the bill. That guy who wrote it, Langford, he's a conservative Republican. You yourself spoke on this. Trump killed that bill because he didn't want the issue to work against him in the election. That's your boyfriend. How you get? Whoa. Well, I mean, you got to defend that.
Well, first I have to tell you what I actually said about it. Like, so what I said about that bill before it even got released was, hey, let's read it. And anybody who has an opinion on it without reading it, you know, it's kind of stupid. That's what I said, and I stand by that. What happened with that bill is a lot more complicated. You had a very complex bill written in a dark room. They come out, you've got this extremely, immigration law is very complicated, and everyone turned their guns on it and fired
That's a revision of what you said. You said it was a good bill, and you have a lot of grifters in your party who didn't want it passed. Yeah, you did.
We can fact check this. I never got a chance to have an opinion on it. That's the problem, and I stand by that. That's
somehow
I
read it. Somehow I read your opinion on it.
What I said was, it's foolish. I'll tell you exactly what I said. It was the height of stupidity to have an opinion on something you haven't read yet. And none of us had read it yet. Now, there's more complexities to that. And I think the cynical people were rightfully cynical, saying, why are you coming up with this in the last year of your administration? We had a height of 300,000 illegal crossings just a few months ago. Oh, because you know it's a campaign issue now. Why don't you first start with putting back in place all of Trump's executive orders that had gotten the border down under control, down to 14,000 illegal crossings a month, which is pretty much well within.
That's kind of what they put in the bill that you were for until Trump wanted killed. Anyway, I got to move on because we have so many.
That was, of course, from last night's edition of Real Time with Bill Maher, and we have a lot to look at from it, so I'll try to respond quickly to that first clip. Every time that debate comes up and someone is able to effectively make the argument that we've been talking about now for months and months about just the issue of the border and how that border security bill plays into the conversation, I'm really happy to see this going more and more mainstream, more and more people being clear about Trump's culpability and sole, essentially, responsibility for getting Republicans to shoot down that once-in-a-generation border security bill just to hurt Biden politically, and how that one act, and they tried to bring back that border security bill again, and they got shot down again, that one act shows just where Trump's priorities are. It's not about solving problems. It's just about attaining power and inflicting pain on his political opponents. And so every time the subject of the border comes up, we have to inject that into the conversation. Otherwise, Trump gets away with a framing of the issue that is just not accurate. And Dan Crenshaw, as was called out by Bill Maher, was one of the Republicans calling out his colleagues back during that debate for shooting this down.
The height of stupidity is having a strong opinion on something you know nothing about. I'm extremely disappointed in the very strange maneuvering by many on the right to torpedo a potential border reform bill. If we have a bill that, on net, significantly decreases illegal immigration, and we sabotage that, that is inconsistent with what we told our voters we would do. People will make up whatever reasons they want to. There's a number of them, I'm sure. But it would be a pretty unacceptable dereliction of your...
Yeah, and to be fair to Dan Crenshaw, again, he was responding to that, as he said, in much more aggressive language, you'll notice, than what he's using now that we're getting close to the election. But he was responding to that before the actual bill, the details of it were released, but we had a general sense of what was going to be in it, and there was reporting about the structure. And so then he was saying, wait, why are my MAGA colleagues, or more MAGA colleagues, saying, oh, we're going to shoot this down when we haven't even been able to read the bill? And it seemed back then he was believing, especially based on who was crafting it, the conservative Senator James Langford, that it was going to be something that should probably get passed, but his colleagues opposed it. Nevertheless, now he's a little bit less aggressive. A few other things he said in that clip. He said it was a complex bill written in a dark room. They say stuff like that, but then you got to read the whole bill. Yes, these things are complex. I don't know how that relates. It makes it sound suspicious. Someone has to write it in some room somewhere. All of Congress can't sit in to write a bill, so they wrote it in a smaller group, then they release it to everyone, and you get to decide. I don't know what's strange about that. The last year of the administration point, they waited so long to do this. I've addressed that so many times. I'll try not to dive into it all again. I do think the Biden-Harris administration should have started earlier, at least in their messaging, being more aggressive in their participation in solution-oriented conversations relating to the border, right? Talk about the issue more, show that they're taking it seriously, and negotiate more often on deals. But that doesn't excuse the obstruction of solutions, and we should add the context that off the bat, Biden proposed an immigration reform bill and has continued to propose increases in investments to southern border security. So that is not the picture they often depict. And then last thing, the Trump got everything under control thing. We talked about that. The big drop they're so excited about was pandemic related, and we've addressed the years before that. Next clip.
Every single one, in every single case, the Trump administration is more moderate and more in line with what more people want in America, and the outcomes are just better.
Well, yes.
I'm not. Vladimir Putin, okay, he's moderate. He wants to pull out of NATO. That's really moderate. Project 2025, that's really moderate. I mean, we can go.
Yes, that was a quick one, and we'll get on to a little bit longer of a discussion, but it just shocked me that I know Dan Crenshaw is advocating for Trump, but I've known people who are more rational Republicans, and since I lived in and grew up in Texas, people who lived in Dan Crenshaw's district in Texas and thought of him as a more moderate Republican, and that characteristic showed itself in the border conversation earlier on, like I showed you in that clip. He's called out Marjorie Taylor Greene as sort of a show woman and stuff to that effect. But then he's willing to say something as absurd as, which just loses any moderate credibility. Oh, the Trump administration's the real moderate one. When obviously the Biden-Harris administration has governed in a super common sense, you don't have to agree with common sense, obviously, but on the political spectrum, a really moderate place on that spectrum, has done a bunch of bipartisanship, whereas Trump is laying out what would be an incredibly extreme term in office. Even if you poll on individual items, Trump's agenda is so much more unpopular, one issue after another compared to Kamala Harris's. So he's just basing that off of nothing. Then you have this.
Clinton made an undeniable point of Democratic policy. Since the end of the Cold War, there have been 51 million jobs created in the United States. 50 million were created under Democratic presidents and 1 million under Republican presidents.
You know, that's
50 to 1.
You've got to be able to tie, if you're going to make claims like that.
First of all, I love you. I love Clinton. That's a bullshit thing to say.
Okay.
Because as we both know, am I right?
Yeah.
As we both know, jobs created, it has a lot to do with what the last guy did. Clinton got rid of Glass-Steagall. Did that have anything to do with the collapse in 2008 of the economy? I think it did. So maybe some of the jobs that were lost.
I'm sorry.
It's just a bullshit thing to say.
I don't think it is.
But you've got to tie a policy to an outcome.
Right.
I can tie policies from Donald Trump to outcomes.
Yeah, so this, if you were to fact check that claim, it's a true stat. Net job creation. A president comes into office, mark how many jobs there are. When they leave office, how many jobs are there? And it's true that by that metric, 50 million of the 51 since 1989, I think it is, were created under Democratic presidents compared to 1 under Republican presidents. That's brutal. There is context, as Bill Maher was pointing out. I think Maher's instinct there is probably that people don't buy that because they think surely that sounds like you're saying if you were to look at monthly job creation, it would average out, which it does, but it doesn't sound right. It sounds like there was just no job creation throughout the presidencies of Republicans as opposed to these huge loss of jobs during crises. But that's why I like focusing on let's look at the last 100 years. And even if you adjust for who was in Congress, even if you do sort of adjust for the crises that were out of the hands of the people in power, some of them were not out of the hands, by the way, but the pandemic, okay, Trump made things worse because he exacerbated it, but he didn't cause a pandemic. Even if you adjust for these different things, still, the average performance of the economy over the last century is much better under Democrats compared to Republicans. And so the 50 million jobs compared to 1 net job creation, it's stunning. It'll really get you thinking. And there is an underlying truth to it. Or it's a true stat, but there's also an underlying really good point about the superiority of Democratic policies. But I agree a little bit with Bill Maher that if you just throw that out without context, people assume it must be funny business with stats type of deal. And that's why I think a more succinct point that more people resonate with is last 100 years, far better across unemployment, average monthly job creation, stock market performance, wage growth, GDP growth, much better under Democrats compared to Republicans. Even when they've done these analyses, they'll try to adjust for all sorts of different metrics. Who's holding Congress? Let's put a delay on it so that you can wait for these policies to stop impacting. And it shows up time and time again. So that's interesting. But then Dan Crenshaw said at the tail end there, well, you have to point to a policy. You can't point to a policy that contributed for the Biden-Harris administration. What? I don't know why people do that. You don't have to like their policies for whatever reason, but presidential historians are able to tell you, regardless of if you're a supporter of the Inflation Reduction Act, or you're a supporter of the bipartisan infrastructure law, you're a supporter of the public safety law they did, if you're a supporter of the PACT Act, they are still able to acknowledge by semi-objective metrics Biden's administration, thus Biden-Harris administration, has been one of the most legislatively effective in decades and decades. And so this legislation, a lot of it investments in projects that create jobs, obviously contributed to the really strong jobs numbers, and that's what we've seen in past Democratic administrations as well. Last clip about abortion.
But remember, in Ohio's a red state, and what did they do? They put it into their constitution that you have a right to abortion. So it doesn't always end up the way you say it does.
They put it in the Constitution because the voters said.
Exactly.
The Republican politicians.
A democracy. Look at that.
Okay. And so you would vote to maintain the 6-week ban?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a conservative Republican.
Look at that. Okay.
But this issue, this is what lost the Republicans the 2022 midterms, and it's going to lose them this 2024 election. That is my prediction. I would not have believed it a month ago. I mean, a month ago, right after he got shot by the incel, I mean, it was like over.
That's an accurate way of describing him.
Well, right. I mean, they were measuring the drapes. I mean,
yeah, it does seem Republicans are just not learning their lesson on abortion politics, at least. They just can't stop implementing really bad policies, and hopefully that will, as Bill Maher's prediction was, end up costing them the election in November. Let me know what you thought of all that in the comments, and if you want to support the show, you can do so by clicking the join button below.